real and concrete economic strength. And those fears cannot be discounted. Yet, consider this. On the current forecast, with no further actions, debt will, for the next 6 years, fall relative to the United States' GDP. Healthcare costs, which account for almost a quarter of our budget and have been out of control for decades, actually appear for the last 3 years to have grown no more rapidly than GDP. And the statisticians know what has not been publicized widely yet, which is in the period surrounding this April 15th, we collected about $100 billion more in revenue than had been anticipated, pointing to the possibility of deficits that are less serious than is supposed. Monetary policy confronts, to be sure, important challenges. It is easier to enter into quantitative easing than it is to exit from quantitative easing. Long-term rates remain at abnormally low levels. And yet, if you look at signs of U.S. inflation pressure, wage growth is actually down. Break-even inflation, as inferred from our index bond market, shows declines. And there is time to address these concerns. And so there is a risk of slowdown, to be sure. There is a risk that the exit will not be simple to manage, to be sure. But I think the preponderant expectation has to be for relatively rapid growth that remains stable for some years to come. I do not minimize the various political challenges in the United States, and there have certainly been moments in the last couple of years of squabbling over the budget deficit that do not seem to me to befit a great nation. Yet, for all our problems, we come with substantial strengths in the United States that I will believe will serve us well in the years ahead. 4 stand out. A basic resilience. It is perhaps a feature of the United States that we have this capacity to become tremendously alarmed about our future. And that then spurs us to action. I am old enough to remember the Sputnik period, when people thought that the Soviet Union would surpass us. John Kennedy believed on the day he died that the Russian economy would be larger than the American economy in 1985. I remember well as a young economist reading the Harvard Business Review in 1991, every single issue of which had some version of the joke that the Cold War was over and Japan had won. And we were alarmed. And we're alarmed again. And that's what puts in motion the processes of change that respond to the alarm. Energy. I already touched on it. I was studying on the plane here a Citigroup analysis. I don't know whether the analysis is precisely correct or not, but the fact that it could be made is a very powerful statement. It said that by 2020, the combination of U.S. oil imports, U.S. domestic oil production, and U.S. imports from Canada will exceed U.S. domestic consumption. That is a profound change that points to a substantial improvement in our trade position and points to a substantial source of strength. And of course, for more years, U.S. manufacturers and U.S. energy users will benefit from a price of natural gas that is far below the price of natural gas in other parts of the world. Innovation. If you think about where those products are coming from, where those mobile phones are coming from, so far, others have not been successful in emulating the distinctive combination of flexible, incredibly entrepreneurial finance and an entrepreneurial culture that defines Silicon Valley and information technology, or my home city of Boston in the life sciences. I used to say in the 90s, during the time that I was Treasury Secretary, and it surprises me a bit that it's still true, that the United States was the only country in the world where you could raise your first $100 million before you bought your first necktie. And that is essentially still the case, and that is a profound competitive advantage for the United States. And there is one other great advantage the United States has, and that is the demographic. Uniquely in the industrialized world, we have a rate of fertility that exceeds replacement and provides for an aging population. And with all our problems in this area, we stand out relative to Europe and Japan in our ability to attract and assimilate immigrants to our very great benefit. All of these things leave me with no sense of complacency. Indeed, that would be what would alarm me most. But with a sense that there is the prospect that the next years can be good ones for the United States. It is more difficult to be serene in looking at the situation in Europe. My old teacher, Rudy Dornbush, used to say that in economics and finance, things take longer to happen than you think they will, and then they happen faster than you thought they could. It's helpful in many parts of life, but it is, I think, helpful in thinking about the challenges that the European monetary system has faced. Many expected when that system was introduced that a system of many countries with many governments and one money would prove complex to operate. They reasoned that there were two standard models of adjustment in the world. One was the kind of model that exists between Michigan and Texas. When times are good in Texas and they're tough in Michigan, the federal government taxes Texas a lot more, taxes Michigan a lot less. That tends to balance things, and people move from Michigan to Texas, and that further balances things. And the federal government stands behind the banks in Michigan using money that they get in part from Texas. And all of that stabilizes things. That's one model. A second model is the model that exists between Michigan and Ontario, Canada. There are no large tax transfers. There's no common standing behind banks. Migration is very limited. But when times are tough in Ontario, and they're good in the north central region of the United States, the Canadian dollar depreciates, and a depreciated Canadian dollar makes everything Canada produces cheaper, which raises the demand and puts people back to work. The challenge in Europe is that the common money removes both of those mechanisms. You do not have the cushions that exist within the United States, and you do not have the exchange rate flexibility that exists between the United States and Canada. The result is a system that can and has proven to be highly brittle. The consequence of doubts about creditworthiness and limited transfers has been an enormous procyclicality of demand in the most troubled countries. Where demand is short, austerity has been most severe, leading to further cutbacks in GDP, leading to limited, if any, progress in bringing down debt ratios. And so it is possible to look at Europe, and indeed I think right to look at Europe with admiration for the goal of unity. It is right to look at Europe with appreciation for what, in particular, Mario Draghi has been able to accomplish. Never before have so few words and even less actions been so profoundly salutary in a financial situation, as his commitment late last summer to do whatever was necessary, and his follow-on assertion that that could be a lot, and he was prepared to do a lot. It is a remarkable achievement to have maintained stability this long. But the avoidance of catastrophe should not be confused with the reality of progress. And economic prospects for Europe appear to be very poor looking forward several years. Much of that is a consequence of the macroeconomic malaise associated with the fixed exchange rates, many of which are non-competitive, and the procyclical austerity in a time of downturn. But those concerns are magnified by structural issues, continuing rigid labor markets and lack of flexibility to start businesses, to make changes in labor arrangements, to make necessary